What if two rival brake pad brands on the same shelf, one nearly double the price of the other, came off the exact same production line, owned by the same company? A handful of manufacturers make almost every brake pad and disc sold in this country, hiding behind more than a dozen names. 5 of those brands on sale in the UK right now. Cheapest first. Number 5. Don. Everything on this list covers discs just as much as pads. The same handful of groups cast both, and a disc carrying one badge is routinely machined on the same production line as a disc wearing a completely different one a few meters away. Sounds like a bloke's name on a workshop sign-in sheet, not a brake brand, and most drivers walking past it on a shelf have never heard of it. Don is owned by TMD Friction, a manufacturer headquartered in Hartlepool in the northeast of England that also happens to own several other brands you're about to recognize. Don sits at the budget end of that group's range. Same friction technology, same testing standards, just without the marketing spend that pushes the pricier names up front on the shelf. This is worth understanding properly because it explains everything else on this list. Running a genuinely independent brake friction factory with its own testing labs, its own compound research, and its own approval process with car manufacturers costs an enormous amount to set up and keep running. So instead of a dozen truly separate competitors on that shelf, a handful of large groups each run several brand names simultaneously, aimed at different price points and different types of buyer, using the same underlying factories and formulations to spread that cost across as many customers as possible. Once you know to look for it, the pattern becomes obvious on nearly every shelf in a motor factor, not just brakes, but it's brakes where the safety angle makes people least likely to ever question the price they're quoted, because nobody wants to sound like they're haggling over the one part of the car actually responsible for stopping it. Regulators have looked at consolidation in this exact industry more than once, and the conclusion every time lands roughly the same way. None of it is illegal, because nobody's forcing you to buy any specific badge. They're simply relying on you never finding out which badges are related in the first place. TMD Friction and Federal Mogul between them account for a genuinely enormous share of the aftermarket friction materials sold across the UK and Europe, which means most of the choice on a typical motor factor's wall is really a choice of which price tier within one of 2 supply chains you'd like to pay into. Number 4. Pagid, a properly old name founded in Essen, Germany, back in 1948, with a real racing pedigree behind it. Pagid is also TMD Friction. Same Hartlepool-linked group, different badge, aimed at a slightly different customer, the one who wants to feel like they're buying performance-focused German engineering rather than a budget brand. The friction compound behind both names comes out of the same corporate research and manufacturing operation either way. Pagid built its reputation in motorsport long before most road drivers ever heard the name, supplying racing teams where a friction compound failing under heat isn't an inconvenience, it's a crash, and that racing pedigree is exactly what gets marketed hardest on the road-going packaging, even though the everyday pad and disc set in the box is built for ordinary commuting, not a circuit. Pagid's disc range genuinely does include some real metallurgical differences, better heat dissipation on specific track-focused lines, but the standard road-going disc sitting next to the budget, Don-branded equivalent on the same shelf is frequently cast from the same mold at the same foundry. Number 3. Mintex. If you've had brakes done anywhere in this country in the last few decades, there's a real chance this name has come up. It's one of the most recognized brake brands on British shelves, with nearly a century of reputation behind it. Mintex is TMD Friction as well. At this point, you're 3 brands into the list, and they've all traced back to the exact same group, which tells you something about how few companies are actually standing behind the entire shelf. Mintex has been manufacturing friction materials since the 1920s, genuinely one of the oldest names in the business. And TMD Friction itself is ultimately owned by Nishinbo Holdings, a Japanese industrial conglomerate, meaning a brand most British drivers assume is a homegrown institution answers, several ownership layers up, to a head office on the other side of the planet. Mintex's disc range covers everything from standard commuter cars up through vans and light commercial vehicles, and the coating and finish on a Mintex disc can be genuinely indistinguishable, sometimes down to the casting marks, from the Dawn disc sitting one shelf below it at a noticeably lower price. If you want to know exactly how many household brake names collapse into this same one company by the time we hit number 1, subscribe now, because the answer is bigger than you'd guess. Number 2, and this is where it gets properly interesting. Textar, arguably the most respected premium brake name in Europe, fitted as original equipment on plenty of German performance cars, the brand enthusiasts specifically seek out and pay extra for over anything else on this list. Textar is also TMD Friction. The exact same company behind Dawn, Pagid, and Mintex also owns the premium name sitting at the top of the same shelf, meaning the budget option and the enthusiast's top pick can be manufactured in the same facility, to the same underlying formulation, by the same engineers, under 4 completely different identities, aimed at 4 completely different budgets and egos. Textar built that premium reputation the honest way. Decades of original equipment contracts with German manufacturers who don't tolerate mediocre braking performance on cars capable of serious speed. And that reputation is entirely deserved. What's not disclosed on the box is that the exact same reputation, and very often the exact same production run, is what Dawn, Pagid, and Mintex are quietly drawing on every time TMD Friction decides which badge to print that day. Independent testing labs that benchmark friction materials for consumer magazines have flagged this exact pattern before, finding pads from ostensibly rival badges within the same ownership group performing near identically on stopping distance and noise, while their retail prices sat noticeably apart. That's not a scandal any regulator's likely to step in on. Badge-based pricing within one company's own product range isn't illegal anywhere in Europe. It's simply not something anyone in that supply chain has a reason to advertise to the person actually paying for it. Picture standing in a fast-fit center while your car's up on the ramp for an MOT and the technician walks over holding a brake pad worn down to a sliver of material, telling you it's borderline and really needs doing today. Want the premium pads or the standard ones? Brake pad wear genuinely does vary and genuinely does matter for safety. This isn't a fake test the way a soft battery reading sometimes is. An MOT tester failing a car on brake pad thickness is applying a real, legally defined minimum, not inventing a problem. What's rarely mentioned in that conversation is the bit that happens next. Premium and standard, sitting on the same fast-fit center's price list, might both be TMD Friction product at 2 different labels and 2 very different labor-inclusive prices, and the technician upselling you has often got no idea either, because the brand relationship sits several layers above anyone actually fitting the parts. Fast-fit chains negotiate their own supply deals separately from what's on a shelf at a motor factor down the road, which means the exact same pad, under the exact same badge, can carry 2 entirely different price tags depending on which forecourt happens to be fitting it that afternoon. And number 1, Ferodo. If any single name on this entire list deserves better than what happened to it, it's this one. Ferodo was founded in England in 1897, and this isn't just an old company. It built the world's first brake pad, then decades later built the first disc brake pad ever fitted to a mass-produced car on the Triumph TR3. Donald Campbell used Ferodo brakes to set a land speed record of over 400 miles an hour. For most of the 20th century, Ferodo held something close to half the entire global original equipment market on its own, the actual standard the rest of the industry was measured against. The reference point every competitor's marketing department quietly aimed their own compounds at for the better part of a century. Since 1998, Ferodo has been owned by Federal Mogul, an American industrial group, and Federal Mogul doesn't stop there either. The same company also owns Wagner and Jurid, meaning a second entire cluster of brand names most drivers assume are independent competitors, are, once again, one company wearing several coats. There's a particular irony sitting inside that 1998 sale that's worth sitting with for a second. Ferodo's entire business, the one that set the global standard everyone else was chasing for most of the 20th century, was built on precision, consistency, and a reputation nobody could match. That exact reputation is what made the company valuable enough for an American industrial group to want to buy outright. The quality wasn't the casualty here, the independence was, and most drivers reaching for a box with Ferodo printed across it today have no idea they're choosing a Michigan-headquartered conglomerate's product line, not a British workshop's. Here's 5 things worth doing before your next brake job. 1. Ask directly who manufactures the pads being quoted, not just the badge on the box. 30 seconds of asking usually gets you a straight answer, because unlike the badge itself, most fitters aren't actually trying to hide it. They just never get asked. Independent motor factors will often tell you outright which group a part comes from if you simply say the word out loud, because unlike a dealer network, they're not tied to defending one badge's markup over another. 2. Check the wear indicator and minimum thickness specified for your exact car rather than trusting a verbal, "it's getting low." Most pads have a visible minimum groove or wear sensor built in that removes the guesswork entirely. 3. Look up which group actually owns the brand before paying a premium for the name on the box. If it traces back to TMD Friction or Federal Mogul, you're often paying for positioning on a shelf, not a different factory. 4. Match your discs to your pads rather than mixing an expensive disc with a cheap pad, or the other way around, because the pairing matters more to how your brakes actually perform than either component does on its own. 5. Get actual figures in writing before work starts, not just, "yeah, it'll be about that," because vague verbal quotes are exactly where the gap between a fair price and an inflated one usually hides. 6. If a garage quotes you a specific named brand, ask if they can fit the equivalent from a different name in the same ownership group instead. Some will simply say no because of a supplier account they can't easily change, but plenty will happily switch and drop the price the moment you show you know the badges are related. And 7. Keep the old pads if the garage will let you. A genuinely worn pad and a barely used one look completely different, and it's the easiest way to confirm afterward that the work you paid for actually happened. None of this means every brake pad on a shelf performs identically. Compounds and testing regimes genuinely differ even within the same manufacturing group, and for track use or heavy towing that difference can actually matter. For the overwhelming majority of ordinary driving in this country, what matters far more is whether you're paying for genuine performance or paying twice for the same friction material wearing a fancier badge. If you want to see exactly how far this same ownership map stretches across the rest of your car, subscribe. This is only 2 parts deep into a much bigger picture. The brand on the box and the company that actually pressed it are 2 separate questions, and now you're one of the people in the queue who actually knows which one you're being charged for.